Okay, everybody, welcome to the Institute of Health and Social Care Management and our Training, Learning and Development Festival. This session now is really interesting for anybody who's involved across health and social care in de-risking and protecting their organisation in the wake of cyber threat and the idea that there may be malicious people out there, not necessarily with the best intentions towards you, your organisation, and more importantly, the data about the people that you serve. I'm thrilled to be welcomed by one of the newest partners of the Institute of Health and Social Care, Cyberscale, led by and founded by Darren Chapman, who joins me now to have a quick kind of romp through what cybersecurity is, what it isn't, and to try to scale the sorts of threats that organisations today might face. So hello, Darren. Fantastic that you can join us to discuss this really important topic. Perhaps before we begin, could you just give us the dime tour about Cyberscale? What do you do and how do you do it?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, John. Really pleased to be partnering with the organisation. Yeah, my name's Darren Chapman, as you've said. My company is Cyberscale. So we're a team, quite a small team at the moment. So we're about 7-8 people, and we are a cybersecurity specialist company. So we don't deal in sort of general IT support or websites or anything like that. We purely focus on cyber and information security and helping organisations across all kind of sizes and sectors, with basically trying to do the best job they can of keeping the cyber criminals at bay, and also being able to deal with those types of threats really well if they do happen, because 100% prevention is basically impossible to achieve. We can get somewhere close to it maybe, but there's always a residual risk. So how well we can deal with that is really important as well.
Perfectly put. Well, thank you for the dime tour, as they might call it. Look, today, 2022, May 2022, most people have a PC or a tablet or a laptop, particularly in the work environment. Most people have got a phone. Most organizations have got some kind of database or server that's looking after sensitive information about the people whom they serve. But give us an idea of the sort of scale of the threat that exists today in terms of maliciousness and the likelihood of cyber attack. Can you give us any kind of a scope and scale outline?
Yeah, I mean, it's not getting any better. Let's put it that way. Obviously, as you rightly said, there's things that sort of evolve through all of our organisations and the way that we work that feed into this picture. So just the sheer number of devices is something that you've numbers and different types of devices is something you've touched on, and it's something that we actually do right at the start of one of our training sessions, as we ask everybody, what devices do you have that store or process information? And that could be from a personal perspective, or it could be in their businesses or the organizations they work for. And it is, it's hugely, it's desktops, laptops, tablets, phones. And then you've also got smart devices that in the homes now and things like that as well, which are all potential ways into networks and devices that store and process data. So it is that whilst that's all really good from technology is great from the point of view of enabling us to do things and connect and communicate, but it also grows the sort of areas of risk and what we call attack vectors, and what you can use attackers can use to get into systems. So one really good place to look, is the government produces a survey every year called security breaches, data security breaches, and I'm just looking at that on my other screen, just to give you a flavour. This is a sort of 12-month picture every year. So in the last 12 months, the number of businesses or the proportion of businesses that have been affected by some kind of cyber attack, 39% of businesses overall, or organizations overall, 36% of those, 36% of micro firms, 48% of small firms, 59% of medium firms, and 72% of large firms had some sort of cyber attack or data breach within the last 12 months. And they also break it down by sector as well. So there's always information on there. So I mean, there isn't one for. They haven't published one for health, but it's always pretty high up on the list for various reasons, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Could you give us an idea of the sorts of threats that exist? What takes place when we talk about a cyber attack? What are the typical weapons that are deployed against organizations?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll pick one, which is by far probably the biggest one in terms of end result and disruption to organizations, and that's ransomware. So I think most people will probably be familiar with that, but for anybody who isn't, that's where attackers will gain access to your organization's data. They'll encrypt that data, so you're not able to access it. And then they will demand that you make a payment to them to basically release that data. So very much like a traditional ransom scenario, but we're obviously looking at data. And if you don't pay that ransom, then the data remains encrypted and you don't have access to it. So that's kind of the biggest one. And then obviously lots of different types of attacks. All of those attacks are designed to affect one of three aspects of data, really. So there's three things that we look at, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And if any one of those aspects of data is compromised, then obviously that has a detrimental effect on the organization. Ransomware is mainly around availability, but some of the evolution of it means that they're starting to affect confidentiality of it as well.
Perfect. And I might be wrong here. I know there are sophisticated, often state-sponsored cyber nasties out there, but a lot of it is also quite, small scale and unsophisticated, isn't it? It's just people who just, for whatever reason, best known to themselves, decide that they just want to be malicious.
Very much so. I think it's you can kind of make an analogy with sort of more traditional crime, I guess. You obviously got your opportunist thieves who might snatch a bag or might smash a car window because they see something on the dashboard, right through to your serious organised crime groups who money laundering and those kind of things. And cyber criminals, cyber crime is similar. You have, like you say, at the very top end, you've got what we call state-sponsored groups who are, state-enabled by, probably the usual suspects, and they're very sophisticated, very well enabled, very well funded. You've also got sort of just sitting slightly below them or alongside, you've got serious crime, organised crime groups, most of whom are outside of the UK, which obviously makes it very difficult to kind of catch them and pursue them and do anything about that. And they're very well funded, and they're using it to fund other criminal activity a lot of the time, right down to your what we would call script kiddies is one of the terminologies we use, who's really just someone who's kind of playing around really and trying to learn and perhaps prove how clever they are and maybe do something disruptive. Might be a malicious ex-employee or something with a grudge, who's got a little bit of technical skill. So you've got a whole range, and obviously as the capabilities increase, then the sort of targets change a little bit.
All right, so within health and social care, clearly we've got very large NHS trusts on the health side of things. And then on the social care front, we may have, relatively small organisations, maybe a few beds in a care home or a domiciliary provider, that kind of stuff, and everything in between. If an organisation of any size within health and social care wants to assess where it's at in terms of its defence against cyber attack, have you got some kind of guidance that you might offer for how it might, first of all, evaluate the extent of its current defence?
Yeah, I mean, the very first thing to do, even before you start to look at the defences that you've got in place, is to really make sure that you have a good understanding of your areas of risk as an organisation. And I think what I mean by that really is understand the data that you have, and what the potential impact of that data being compromised is to your organization. And think about those things that I mentioned earlier on, the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability. If you pick those two things, are probably confidentiality and integrity. In fact, they're all probably equally important in the healthcare sector, because if the confidentiality is compromised, then obviously you've got some very sensitive data that can be harmful to an individual, and obviously that links in with GDPR and the data protection and some of the other like Caldecott principles and things like that as well. You've obviously got the integrity of the data. You know, if you've got health records on people and that was altered in some way, then that can have a hugely detrimental effect. And again, the availability. If the data is not available when you need to use it for to access to know what kind of treatment to give somebody, or some of their records, then again that can have a huge impact. So it's really about understanding what you have and what the potential impacts are of that, and perhaps prioritizing some of that as well, because some of the data that you have is not perhaps as critical as others. Once you have a good understanding of that, then you can start to look at, okay, how do we use that data? How do we store it? What systems do we use to process it? How does it move within and in and out of the organization systems? Who do we share it with? And once you start to map all of those things out, I think even as a non-security professional, some things will become apparent where you think, okay, actually we've got lots of data here that we're sharing with a third party. What are we doing to make sure that we're sharing that in a secure manner, and what are the potential threats? And even if you don't know the answers to that, and you might need to bring someone in to help you with that, I think you start to ask yourself the right questions, and that's the real starting point.
Well, that's excellent. Is that, I suppose the map therefore involves the people who have access to it, and you can start to kind of draw that out basically.
Yeah.
The people whom you are holding data about and figuring out what that is, and then the systems that you're using to enable the users and the administrators to kind of link the two together. I suppose they're the holy trinity effectively. Would that be a fair reflection?
That's right. And I think a lot of it, I think one of the sort of we mentioned about it being an issue earlier on. One of the things that's sort of being a quite relatively recent evolution is where two things really. One is a lot more data is cloud-based now. So historically we would pretty much store all our data within our own systems and our own data center, and we would put kind of firewalls around that, right? So we would have like almost like a castle and a moat type thing and a drawbridge, and it was relatively easy to secure compared to nowadays. Never been easy, but relatively easy. But now a lot of it's in the cloud, so you have much less visibility of where it is and what the controls are around it, perhaps. And also it's shared a lot more, which we need to do. That's something that enables better care and all that communication. But when you do that, you lose control over it, you lose visibility, and you lose the ability to apply certain constraints around data because it's with somebody else. So what we call a supply chain attack is a really big thing now, where someone's trying to gain access to an organization's data, and they won't perhaps attack that organization directly. They'll do it from one of their suppliers or one of their partners who perhaps is less well protected from a technical point of view.
All right, so let's say we've done a bit of an audit in terms of where we're at. We've done our mapping of the Holy Trinity. We kind of know now where we might have some vulnerabilities and such like. What sort of action can we realistically take to kind of lock out those with the malicious intent towards us?
So I think one of it can be really hard to know where to start and what to apply, because there's so many things that you can do. So firstly, making sure that you've got that understanding of where your priorities lie and what your crown jewels are, and focusing on those. So that's the first thing to do. In terms of actually what you apply, I think it's good to align it with two things. One is the different types of groups that might be attacking you, and then their capabilities, and then looking at a maturity model, really. So if you've done nothing, then don't try and boil the ocean and protect everything. You need to kind of do the basics right. So looking at something like Cyber Essentials, for instance, or the National Cybersecurity Centre have something called 10 Steps to Cybersecurity, which is very similar. Looking at those types of things, making sure you've got those real foundational aspects in place, and those will stop a lot of the low-level attacks in terms of their capabilities. So it'll stop the script kiddies and those lower-level criminals. Then once you've done that, then let's see what more we can do to mature. So once you've done the basic steps, then it might be a case of starting to look at some more Cyber Essentials, for instance, very technical focused. So it's putting those fundamental technical things in place. Then you might start to look at, okay, we might need to think about actually having a security strategy of some kind. We might need to write that into some policies so that we know, everybody in the organisation knows what we're trying to achieve, and we can use those policies to guide us when we're choosing technical implementations, when we are writing procedures, which are really important, and also when we're training our staff. So training's very key. I would bring that in at the beginning as well, alongside any technical things that you're trying to put in place. And then from there, I think the thing with cybersecurity is it's always evolving. So the threats are always evolving, and as we're trying to put new defense mechanisms in place, the types of attacks are evolving to overcome those. So we need to do the same with maturity. So let's get the basics in place, and then let's keep evolving that and keep improving all of the time. That's what's really important. I guess the other thing I would just say as well is we talk a lot about prevention and ways to prevent cyber attacks. The other thing that's really important is the resilience side. So that's knowing what to do and how to do it when something does happen. So having a security incident response plan in place, which is linked to things like disaster recovery and business continuity, so that you have a plan for dealing with a critical issue, and you're not trying to make really critical, hard decisions when everybody's running around in a panic. The more you can take out of panic, you can take out of it, and decision making out of it at that critical time have a huge bearing on how well you come out of a cyber attack situation.
Fantastic. And I have to say, all the time that you're speaking, I'm just going through in my own mind, like we've done this, we've done that, we've done that. There's a whole mental checklist that you suddenly start to work through. Listen, a lot of organizations, particularly in social care, I suspect, are using data that is to do with the people that they serve. And if that were to be compromised, that would give them an instant and potentially business critical problem, particularly if it wasn't available. So if there was denial of access, for example, or there was some kind of integrity element where you suspect that the data might be being fiddled with. There's a clear protection element here when we're talking about backing up our data. But the last thing you want to do is back it up in a place where actually it's just as bloody easy to be able to access it. So do you have any guidance about backups and how you might do it, how many backups you might do, how regularly you do it, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Something that's very critical, particularly on the ransomware front, because one of the ways that you avoid having to pay the ransom in that scenario is having a good backup of your data where you can recover the data. So there's some pretty clear guidance. Again, if you look on the National Cybersecurity Centre site, there's some really good backup guidance. The key thing is there's a quite simple rule, which we talk about following, which is called the 3-2-1 rule, and that's basically having 3 copies of your data, having 2 of those on separate media. So that could be 2 different cloud-based systems, or it could be 1 cloud-based system and 1 in-house system, perhaps. And then the 1 is having at least 1 of those copies being either offline and disconnected, or what we call immutable. So that might be on a separate encrypted hard drive that is completely disconnected from the main system, or immutable is a copy, could be a cloud-based copy that can't be altered even by the backup administrator. And a lot of that is very much connected with the ransomware threat, because what the ransomware gangs have evolved into doing is, as well as encrypting the data, before they do that, they'll perhaps sit in the organization for quite a while with access into there. They'll make copies of the data that is in there, and they might compromise the backups and stop the backups from working. So you know, even if you did have the backup, if it isn't working, then there's not going to be any use to it. And lots of organizations still don't do the checks that they should be doing to make sure that the backups are working on a regular basis.
Well, look, this is sobering advice, but you know, that's the best way. We've got to give it people straight, haven't we? You know, that's a kind of a quick run through. We've got a few people on the in the audience. Would anybody in the audience like to ask any particular questions, either about their own organisation or just generally about the nature of cyber threat and what they might be doing to protect themselves? Do please feel free to open up, unmute, and ask Darren any questions that you might. I guess that's a no right now, Darren. I have to say, it's very. To be fair to you, you've been very comprehensive here. Could you just talk a little bit about the National Cybersecurity Agency again, because there's a lot of very good advice there, isn't there?
There is. It's sort of my that's my go-to place that I would tell everybody to look at first when they're, you know, looking at cybersecurity. So ncsc.gov.uk. So the National Cybersecurity Centre is born out of GCHQ, for those of you who know that is, and it's really the kind of, I guess, public-facing arm of GCHQ. So their role is really to protect the UK as a whole from cyber threats. They have some really, really good, really well-written advice, really digestible. Lots of advice aimed for different audiences as well. So if you're an IT professional working in your organisation, you can go on there and get some very technical advice. If you run a very small organisation, there's advice in there for there. There's sector-specific information as well. So it's a really good place to go to get really good and simple advice. And also, for people, it gives advice for people looking after their own personal technology and data as well. Because I think we always talk, when we do these sessions, a lot about, you know, we're talking about healthcare now, we talk about, you know, might be finance or retail in a different session. We talk about these risks from a business perspective, but actually the majority of those risks that exist also affect everybody personally and put everybody personally at risk. We've all heard of identity fraud. A lot of that is enabled by, you know, hacking people's devices or their phones. Everybody can be affected by the large data breaches that happen. So, and everybody uses technology, right? Everybody has lots of pictures of their families on their phones, and so when we're talking about data being available or compromised, you know, if you lost your phone and you're not backing up your personal data, then maybe you lose 3 years worth of pictures. That could be a cyber attack, or it could be just that you lose your phone or your phone gets stolen. So a lot of these principles apply equally across the personal side as well, and that advice there is on the National Cybersecurity website as well.
And you can also, it's worth saying, if you are having attacks, you can alert the National Cybersecurity Agency, and they will give you direct advice, and you can log that call with them, and often they'll follow up directly as well.
Yeah.
Well, all right, look, let's leave it at that for today, I think, Darren. That's a fantastic introduction, first of all, to Cyberscale and your own capability. And PS, if you do get into trouble with cybersecurity, I can't think of anybody better to contact and at least get a sympathetic ear and perhaps some practical guidance and advice, or even, dare I say, a solution to your problem. Darren's the man, Darren Chapman at Cyberscale. Darren, thank you so much.
John, before we go, can I just give you I'm going to give you 4 things, like really key tangible things that you can go away and just perhaps think about, put some focus on. So the first one is awareness training, making sure everybody in your organization is aware of the cyber threat and what to do. Really important. The second one is multi-factor authentication. So if you're not using that on all of the systems that you log into, please look at that. It's a really important and really effective way of stopping a lot of cyber attacks. The third thing is incident response planning. So really thinking about how do we deal with these threats if they do happen. And the last one is what we call third party or supplier due diligence. And that's really thinking about, that when we outsource services to a third party or we share data, how do we make sure that that's kept safe? So those 4 things that would be my 4 takeaways.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. I told you it was good, didn't I? You even get a little bonus, 4 key things to give some consideration to. Darren, thank you. We're most grateful to you. We're going to have there is a power hour booked in with you, I think, for a couple of weeks hence, where we're going to be able to look at some of these issues in a bit more detail. But for today, thank you very much indeed for all of your attention. And thank you, Darren, once again, for speaking so eloquently and cleverly about what you do.